Portal 2 was without a doubt one of the most iconic games of the past decade. The game has received great praise for its engaging story, memorable characters, beautiful environments and smooth gameplay, and continues to be popular to this day. But what if I told you that the campaign fails to introduce one of the most critically important mechanics in all of Portal 2 puzzle solving? A mechanic so commonly exploited and so undeniably powerful that it is rare for a proper workshop puzzle to not exploit it in some way. You would be very surprised, but really, this is the case. For those unfamiliar, in short, in both Portal and Portal 2, the player is given a gun with which they can create two wormholes called portals by shooting onto a wide surface. Go in one, come out the other. It's that simple. It is a puzzle game that challenges the player to figure out how to use the gun to navigate rooms that would otherwise be impossible to progress through. These rooms are often filled with various elements that interact with the portals in a certain way and which the player will need to use to solve the puzzle. And to name a few, there's the light bridge, which can help players cross gaps. There's the funnel, which can pull or push the player across gaps or up and down slopes. And there's the laser, which can activate receivers that influence other elements in the room. And there's also different kinds of gels, which either make the player run very fast, or jump very high, or create places to put portals where this was previously impossible. With one player and just two portals, the options are often limited. This is why many puzzles also give the player one or more cubes at their disposal, to put some buttons, or redirect lasers, or help them ascend small height differences. The Portal 2 single-player campaign does a fantastic job intertwining the story with the introduction of all the aforementioned test elements, and a brief exploration of their uses and the possible ways in which the player can use them to their advantage. With all this knowledge, anyone who has completed the campaign can comfortably play many maps in the Steam Workshop, created and published by other players from all over the world, using Portal 2's excellent in-game level editor. Still, the campaign forgot to, or intentionally chose not to, introduce one of the most powerful mechanics in all of Portal 2. It is present in the solution to a good workshop map more often than one can find a light bridge or a funnel. It is crucial for anyone just getting started with Portal 2 workshop puzzle solving to become aware of this as soon as they can. Without this knowledge, the solutions to many good Portal 2 maps will continue to seem just out of reach. I'm talking, of course, about the cube respawn. Because of the way the game works, something as simple as the cube spawning in a puzzle has tremendous ramifications for what kinds of logic can be achieved. In Portal 2, any cube is always accompanied by a cube dropper that will only drop one cube at a time. The presence of this dropper is highly important. If the player accidentally loses the cube, for example by walking through a fizzler or tossing it into the abyss, the player should always be allowed a second chance. Canonically, it is a real human completing the puzzles, so resetting by committing Livent is not an option. It should always be possible to complete the puzzle, no matter what the player has done. Except when the player dies, then it's game over. Either the cube drops automatically, or the dropper is activated by something else, like a button or a laser receiver. In the first case, the dropper will dispense a single cube at the start of the map, and only when the cube is somehow destroyed, it will provide the player with a new one. If the dropper is activated by a button, the player can choose precisely when they want to spawn a new cube. Sometimes this is necessary when it's possible to accidentally leave a cube somewhere out of reach, even when it technically hasn't been destroyed. For example, if I now shoot the wrong portal, it's no longer possible to get to the cube. Thus, a manual respawn button is absolutely necessary. It is also possible to both let the cube auto-respawn and let the player respawn the cube by hand, providing even more options to the player. So why does any of this matter? Well, if the player is given the option to respawn a cube, no one is preventing the player from using this to their advantage. The ability to respawn a cube at certain times is something the player can exploit, and oh boy, it can be exploited a lot. Before I will go on to give examples of this, it is wise to first understand why the almost unrivaled power of the cube respawn should in reality not be all that surprising. Namely, it is explained by the fact that Portal 2 is a puzzle game that is all about the positions of things. To be precise, if someone asks you at what point in a certain map you are, in most cases all you have to tell them is where you are, where your portals are, and where the cubes are. In some circumstances some additional information is required, like the direction a laser cube is aiming, or turrets having been already destroyed or not, but most of the time the aforementioned 3 things will suffice. The solution to a puzzle will, when boiled down to the core, usually consist of a sequence of movements by either the player, a portal, or a cube. Many kinds of changes to these positions can only be made by the player, and the player's reach is limited. To start with the easiest of the 3, a player cannot move their portals to every surface they please. They have to be able to see that surface from their current position. We already saw the intricacies this can bring in the example map from a minute ago. Allowing the placement of portals anywhere without any restriction would nullify the use and function of almost all the test elements we know and love. It is worth pausing for a moment to think about how genius a design choice that was from the developers. Okay, pause over. In stark contrast to the seemingly simple rules for moving portals, the way the player can move is a lot more complicated, and is in fact the main focus of the original Portal game. Namely, aside from walking, the player can also fling up and down and through the air by utilizing the momentum preservation property of portals. To convince you of the rich logical structure that can be achieved with exclusively player movement, I would recommend anyone watching to take a look at a collection linked in the description called No Elements. It will gently introduce you to the wealth of puzzles that can be created using no elements at all, only the player, portal surfaces and occasional glass and grating. It was truly masterfully crafted, so please consider checking it out, you will not regret it. Lastly, we get to moving cubes. Obvious ways to do this are the playing picking them up and putting them down, or maybe using a funnel, possibly through portals, to transport them across the room. If this would be all one can do, it would be impossible to move cubes that are out of reach of both the player and portals. This would reduce the complexity of the puzzle, as having fewer options available means that fewer paths and strategies would need to be considered. But fortunately, there's one other way to move cubes that is unlike any of those mentioned before. Indeed, you guessed it, it's the cube respawn. So this explains why cube respawns are so powerful. Moving cubes is one of the key aspects of almost any Portal 2 puzzle, and the player cannot move cubes that are out of their reach, be it physically or by not being able to place the necessary portals in view of the geometry or logic of the map. The cube respawn is the final and most subtle method of moving cubes. It will transport a cube from wherever it was all the way back to the dropper, sometimes straight back into the player's hands. Now finally, here are some examples of the power of cube respawns, and will serve to illustrate just how versatile a concept it is. Let us first look at some very simple examples from the first map in a series of my own making. A link to it can be found in the description. The sole purpose of this introductory map was to familiarize the player with the concept of cube respawns. That's how important I believe it is. In this first room, we must get a cube on a button, but there's a fizzler in the way. The barrier is too high for us to toss the cube across, but we might be able to fling it using this panel. But how do we give the cube enough speed? Indeed, the solution is to destroy the cube. A new one will drop, and it will have enough speed to clear the barrier. Who knew a fizzler could ever come in handy? In the second room, we only have to reach the exit. First, we must portal across the pit, and for that we need to put the stairs down. But once we are across, we need to ascend the stairs again. How do we get the cube back on the button from all the way over here? That's right, we toss it in the goo, it will respawn right onto the button, raising the stairs for us. And this time, goo saves the day. In the final room, we must fling to the exit, and can only do so by jumping into the floor when the stairs are down. But to get on the platform we want to fling from, with the portal facing the exit, we must use the stairs. So this time, we need to get the stairs back down, from all the way up here. And how do we do that? Exactly, we respawn the cube and fling safely to victory. For another example, consider this room here. To allow us to progress, we must activate the laser receiver. And to do that, we must be all the way at the back of the room with the portal all the way in the front. But there are 4 fizzlers blocking our way that erase our portals. It seems impossible, even with a cube to help us. But however, we can put a cube here, stand on this button ourselves, and shoot a portal here. We may then take the cube with us to open one more fizzler, but the final one keeps blocking our path. We cannot take the cube with us anymore. Or can we? Of course, we can respawn it. That gets us through the last field and solves the puzzle. We now find ourselves in this huge maze with no less than 10 rooms, but the same objective. We are now given 2 cubes. Can you figure out how to use the cube respawns to your advantage to complete this challenge? A link to the map is provided in the description. I designed this tiny test specifically for this video, to showcase even more uses of cube respawns. If you want to try to solve it for yourself before I give away the solution, once again, a link to it can be found in the description. We can start by spawning the cube by activating the laser receiver. Putting the cube on the button lowers the piston, but how do we get up? We cannot reach the cube to take it off the button. Ah, surely, we must respawn it somehow. But how do we get access to the laser? We cannot see it from over here. We probably must make use of this bridge. But we also need our cube with us on the other side to put it on the button. Another brilliant idea strikes us. Another cube respawn. Indeed, if we put the laser cube like this, we can respawn it. Then put it on a button like so, and boom, the puzzle is solved. Cube respawns are an integral part of many complex puzzles. For example, let's look at the most relevant parts of the solution to this fairly innocent looking map that I made about a year ago. It requires no less than 7 respawns. 9 spawns in total if you count the first times too. It's crazy, isn't it? Almost all the maps that I've shown so far were designed by yours truly. But to prove that I'm not the only one who uses this mechanic extensively, let me conclude with 2 examples made by the fairly well-known Portal 2 genius Leo. For those who don't want the solution spoiled to them, you can find the maps in the description. In this first map, you need a laser receiver deactivated at a certain moment, because this deactivates a funnel that lets you fling to the exit. The only way to do so is to place the standard cube on a button that deactivates a fizzler and to set up the laser cube that redirects the laser right in the way of the deactivated fizzler. Respawning the standard cube reactivates the fizzler, thus destroying the laser cube, thus deactivating the laser receiver, thus deactivating the funnel. Again, we see how respawning a cube to remove it can be useful, with the bonus that this move removes 2 cubes at once. It's definitely hard to figure out, which again underscores that cube respawns are not just a quirk for specific situations. Setting them up in the perfect way can take a lot of effort, thought and care. In the second one, you need a cube in the closed off area you can only open by standing on a button from the inside to deactivate the fizzler. The only way to get the cube in there is to respawn it while having a portal under the cube dropper and another portal under the orange gel dropper. that coats the cube in gel, and then by moving a portal to the light bridge surface, the cube will slide on the light bridge through the deactivated fizzler into the room where the player is. This is another example of how respawning can allow to use the momentum given by the cube falling from the cube dropper. With the added twist, we must also immediately coat it in orange gel, because the cube will not slide far enough otherwise. Setting this up is not an easy task. Even realizing that it's necessary is not trivial. Again, cube respawns form an integral part of the logic. Now, some players may have some ethical concerns with respawning a companion cube, and I get that, but it's a small price to pay for such an enormously powerful tool. Some players may object to making such heavy use of a mechanic that was never introduced in the main campaign. And to those I say that a workshop would be a pretty boring place if one was not allowed to push the logical boundaries of what is possible, without resorting to glitches and other cheap tricks, of course. Getting an idea that no one has had before, that's a big part of the fun. Playing without cube respawns is playing with one or even both hands tied behind your back. That's a major disadvantage. As a well-respected puzzle creator once put it rather succinctly, I can't think of a single decent author who does not require cube respawns. None. So the next time you find yourself trying to solve a map and you feel like you just seem to be missing something, try to think about ways to respawn your cubes and see if that could be the piece of the puzzle you might have been missing all this time. And when you're designing a puzzle yourself and seem to have reached the logical dead end, maybe changing the ways in which the player can respawn their cubes can give them just enough extra power to do tons of cool and interesting things that were previously impossible. Never underestimate the power of the cube respawn. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!